Jets players are all motivated to win the Super Bowl in 2024, but there are some other things driving the members of the team. We're talking about Jets motivations today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs have wound down, the sports have stopped sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's show, we're going to talk about motivations. Now, we know every player on the Jets and every coach on the Jets is motivated by trying to win a championship this year. But each individual has other motivations that drive them. And we're going to break some of those down on today's episode. And I think when we're categorizing the Jets, I think that there are three groups of players, three big motivating factors that these players have. And the players can fall into one of three categories. And then there are some other smaller categories that we won't get into today. But I think there are three major categories of motivation that players have. The first are players who are coming back from injuries. And they want to show that they can still do it. They want to show that they can still play at a high level. And of course, foremost among these is Aaron Rodgers, who is now 40 years old. He's now 3 years removed from winning his last MVP in Green Bay. And look, I think if there's one thing we know about Aaron Rodgers is that he loves proving people wrong. He loves proving the doubters wrong. And I mean, I guess on some level, maybe I'm a doubter because I'm not sure Rodgers at 40 years old is necessarily going to be able to play at an MVP level this year. But I don't know that he necessarily needs to because I think the Jets roster is good enough to sustain him. And I think that one of the things that Rodgers really has going for him is that no matter how he plays, it's very, very likely, it's almost a lock that he's going to be a big improvement not over what the Jets had last year, but what the Jets have had for a number of years because the Jets have dealt with really lousy quarterback play for a long time. And with really only a few exceptions, I mean, a serviceable year out of Josh McCown, I guess, in 2017, Ryan Fitzpatrick's record-setting season in 2015, which is record-setting because of how poorly Jets quarterbacks have played through the years. You know, it was more a reflection on how poorly the franchise's quarterbacks have performed since Namath than it was what Fitzpatrick did well. But Rodgers is looking to show that he can still go out there and play at a high level. Rodgers wants to join Tom Brady and Peyton Manning as quarterbacks who have won Super Bowls with two different teams. It would obviously be a potentially legacy-enhancing feat if he was able to do that. And Rodgers has talked openly about how last year was tough on him. You know, what was interesting is heading into last season, it wasn't clear how much longer Rodgers wanted to play. You may remember that when he went into the darkness in 2023, he talked about how he was kind of set on retiring. And then after he returned from the darkness, he decided he wanted to keep playing. And the Jets were the team that he ended up with. And maybe you don't want to remember that whole saga because it was quite a stressful offseason a year ago. But Rodgers is still looking to show he's an elite quarterback in this league. Now, he's obviously the guy everybody has their eyes on, but there are some other players who are trying to show that they can recover from an injury. If we're not talking about Rodgers, I think Elijah Vera Tucker is a guy who comes to mind. AVT the last two seasons, when he's been on the field, he's been pretty good. And the Jets have moved him around because of other injuries on the offensive line. And, you know, AVT is like on the verge of potentially being one of those guys he's good when he's on the field, but when he's on the field is the operative phrase. And I've been very vocal on this show over the last couple of months that I have a lot of optimism for AVT. The way maybe I did not for Mekhi Becton a year ago, even though on paper we were seeing a lot of there were some similarities. I just don't think AVT's injuries, based on what I know about them, are the types of things that are likely to linger the way Becton suffering back-to-back knee injuries were. The other aspect of this is, well, Becton was okay as a rookie. I mean, I think that, you know, relative to what I was expecting, I think Becton's 2020 season was actually pretty decent. there was an open question about how good Becton would have been even had he not gotten injured. You go back 3 years to training camp in 2021, there was a lot of talk about how Becton was struggling. There's a lot of talk about disconnect between Becton and the coaching staff. I mean, you may remember that was the summer of Carl Lawson, because the Jets had just signed Lawson, and it sounded like Lawson was getting the better of Becton every single day. AVT, when we've seen him, he's played well at guard, and he's held his own at tackle when they've moved him there. So I think for AVT, the question is just, can he stay on the field? Can he avoid another one of these freak injuries? Now, the Jets, he's going to be here in 2025 because the Jets picked up his 5th-year option. So for AVT, it's not, he's obviously thinking about his long-term trajectory in this league, because in order to get a second contract of any significance, he's going to have to put together a full season. He's going to have to show that he can continue to play effectively. But he's shown an ability to be a quality starter in this league. The question remains, can he stay on the field? And then another guy we would talk about is Mike Williams. Jets signed Mike Williams to a 1-year contract. I mean, I think that it's clear what both sides want out of this deal. Jets want to get a productive season out of Williams. Williams has been a really solid receiver through his career. Last year, the Jets lacked a quality number 2 receiver to go with Garrett Wilson. They rolled with Alan Lazard. Corey Davis retired. They signed Randall Cobb for some reason. They rolled with Xavier Gipson and Jason Brownlee at points last season. It just was not conducive to winning football games. Jets want to get a productive season out of Mike Williams. And in many ways, Mike Williams fits everything they need in a receiver position, because all the things Garrett Wilson struggles with are things Mike Williams does pretty well. Mike Williams is a big receiver. He can go out and win contested catches. He's more of a downfield threat than Garrett, at least has been through much of his career. He's not a guy who struggles with press coverage. Now, when Garrett has issues, frequently what happens is, Garrett's, I don't want to say Garrett's small, because he's not tiny, but he's a little smaller than your typical receiver. And frequently what happens when Garrett struggles is that other corners are able to get their hands on him and really disrupt him as he gets into his patterns. So in order to avoid that from happening, a guy like Mike Williams, who can go play the X position against more physical corners, because you have to have one guy who's lined up directly on the line of scrimmage at the wide receiver position, at least one. It's typically how the formations work. That doesn't necessarily have to be Garrett anymore. Garrett can kind of get a start from behind the line of scrimmage, where he'll be tougher to jam with Williams out there. Question is, how much does Williams have left in the tank after suffering the injury? Again, this is another one I'm pretty optimistic on. I mean, I think people are maybe selling Williams a little short. I've heard a lot of concern about, his injury history. Doesn't really have that extensive of an injury history, and he's been a very productive receiver through much of his career. I thought that the signing was really a very, very solid move by the Jets back when they did it this offseason. The question, can Williams make good on what I'm saying? I frequently am wrong on these things, but I am optimistic on Williams. So just because I'm saying it doesn't mean he's going to be good, but I have to tell you, I am optimistic that Williams can prove he still belongs in this league. And what does Williams get out of it? Well, if he has a good season, coming off an injury, maybe there's another contract waiting for him down the line, maybe next year, whether it's with the Jets or somebody else. If he still shows he's a high quality starting receiver, he can make quite a bit of money off that. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue our discussion of what's motivating Jets players. And for many players, the biggest motivation is basic. Kind of talked about with Mike Williams. It's money. There are some players who are going out playing for a new contract. We'll talk about who they are, what positions they play, and what the Jets might expect from them, continuing here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. We're about to talk about players seeking new contracts. These are players who are about to hit free agency. Well, in the business world, LinkedIn Jobs is where you find the best free agents. LinkedIn's not just a jobs board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. And LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Really appreciate you tuning in. Today, we're talking about the motivations Jets players have. Now, of course, every Jets player is motivated by winning. Every Jets player is motivated by trying to bring this franchise its first Super Bowl in over 5 decades. But players have their own things that are driving them. In the first segment, we talked about players recovering from injuries, looking to show that they can still come back and play. There's another motivating factor that motivates every single player, but for some players, this is especially pronounced this year. And that's a new contract. The Jets have a number of key players entering the final year of their current contract. And I guess first among them, we could talk about the guy whose status for training camp at this point is a little unknown, and that's Haason Reddick. And of course, Reddick sat out the offseason program. He did not show up at the mandatory minicamp. It's not entirely clear at the time we're recording whether he'll be there for day one of training camp. But at this moment, Haason Reddick is entering the final year of his contract, and it doesn't sound like the Jets are really in the mindset to give him a new deal, at least, again, at the time we're recording this podcast. So Reddick, is going to be 30 years old. That's kind of the magic number in the league, and that might be one of the reasons the Jets are a little hesitant to give him a new deal. The last couple of years, he's been one of the top pass rushers in the league. His career, he was a former first-round pick of Arizona out of Temple, and his first couple of years were not as good as he's been the last few years. He was kind of a late bloomer, but he's become one of the top pass rushers in the league. And assuming he gets to the team on time, assuming that he plays this contract out, that's not the worst thing in the world to have a guy who's motivated, looking to get a new deal, trying to get after the quarterback. Jets brought him in here for one reason. They want him to get sacks. And few players have done that as effectively as Haason Reddick over the last couple of years. There's always the question, once you hit that magic 30 mark, will there be any degree of decline? In fact, I've said on the show that I wouldn't be shocked if there was a little decline from Reddick. I think statistically, first of all, I don't think he's going to get as many snaps as he's gotten at other points in the past because of how much Robert Saleh likes to rotate guys in and out. So that may not be like an actual decline in terms of the quality of his play, but it could be a decline on the stat sheet just because he may not get as many opportunities. But Reddick, look, I think the Jets brought him in to be still be a high-end player. I think, even if there is some mild decline, I think the Jets are still expecting very big things out of him, as well they should. Another guy looking for new contracts in the final year of his current deal, DJ Reed. DJ Reed, who's quietly, and I think Jets fans realize how good DJ Reed is. I think if you're a real Jets fan, you're somebody who watches the team every week, the Jets have a top-notch number 2 corner. You have a guy who, legitimately should have generated. I'm not, there are only so many spots you can get, but I don't think it would have been outrageous for DJ Reed to be selected to a Pro Bowl over the course of the last 2 years because he's been that good. He plays across from Sauce Gardner. Sauce tends to generate most of the attention as far as the national media goes. Now, if you're talking with people who aren't Jets fans, they probably heard of Sauce Gardner. They may not have heard of DJ Reed. I think the Jets fans realize how good DJ is. And of course, he's different style than Sauce. Sauce pretty much does everything well. DJ is a little undersized. And what's interesting about DJ for me is that, a lot of the undersized guys who stick on the outside, they're really physical. They make up for it with just physicality where they can, I think of I don't know why this is the guy who comes to mind. It was a long time ago, but Terrence Newman, very physical corner, lasted a long time in this league, kind of undersized. DJ is just really sticky. He's just a guy whose movement skills are really high. His change of direction ability is really good. He just sticks with guys in coverage. At the end of the last year, I thought the last month was not very good. Now, is that just signing at a bad month? I'd guess that. I do worry a little bit how DJ is going to age because he gets to his late 20s. This is a guy whose game really does depend on athleticism. Can he show he can stick around? Can he have another big year? If he does, then I think the Jets probably will be looking to give him a new contract because I just don't think you want to break up this trio between Sauce, DJ Reed, and Michael Carter II. Top trio in the league. We always talk about how important it is to have playmakers at the wide receiver position. Well, it's every bit as important to have guys who can shut down those wide receivers playing corner for you. So I think having this corner group has been a great luxury for the Jets the last couple of years. And you have to remember, you go back to Robert Saleh's first year. The Jets did not have great corners. Now they had guys, Bryce Hall had a decent enough season. He actually had a decent enough season that people were wondering whether they needed Sauce Gardner, which is crazy to think of. They had Brandon Eccles, who, remains a look. If you have a guy with starting experience like Eccles who can play inside and outside as a backup, that's not the worst thing in the world. But they had guys who are backup caliber corner starting. Now they have the best corner trio in the league. And DJ Reed maintains that level. If he continues to maintain that level, we'll probably be talking about a new contract for him. Another guy we talked about, Mike Williams, coming off an injury. He's also at that magical 30 mark, that big number, 30 years old. If he can put together a big season, look, everybody needs a receiver in the NFL. He could be out for a big payday. The receiver market has exploded. I used to say that you can always find a receiver in the NFL. I don't know that that's true anymore. I think that was true in the past. These days, receivers go for such big money that it might be tough to find a guy. So Mike Williams, if he gets if he has a big season, he could cash in even beyond the age of 30. Another guy, Javon Kinlaw. Jets surprised many of us, including myself, by giving him $7 million guaranteed. It's a one-year deal. I wonder whether part of this deal was that the Jets thought that maybe he'll flourish next to Quinnen Williams, and maybe if he has a big enough season, he'll sign somewhere else next year, and maybe the Jets get a compensatory draft pick for him. That's just my theory. I think it could make sense if that was the plan. But Kinlaw got quite an expensive contract, a former first-round pick of San Francisco, and if we're going to be honest, really was a disappointment for the 40. Even though he got a decent second contract from the Jets, I think if you were asking 49ers fans, I think if you were asking the people running that team, their front office or coaching staff, they would tell you Kinlaw did not produce the level they were hoping for. Of course, Robert Saleh has an affinity for former 49ers, especially guys he coached on the defensive side of the ball. It's one of the reasons Solomon Thomas has been here for so many years. Solomon Thomas, another disappointing first-round pick that was drafted in the first round in San Francisco during the Saleh era. Saleh thinks maybe he can unlock something with Kinlaw. And while I don't give the Jets coaching staff much of benefit of the doubt, and quite frankly, I don't know that I give them the benefit of the doubt with this contract they gave out. I feel like I could give them the benefit of the doubt with Kinlaw if they brought him in on a minimum deal and said, maybe we can untap some potential here. But at the end of the day, this coaching staff, they haven't done a whole lot well. But one of the things they have done well has been to develop defensive linemen. So perhaps they'll be able to do that with Kinlaw. Perhaps the Jets will be able to unlock a player, and perhaps Kinlaw, if he has a big season next to Quinnen Williams, you have to remember Quinnen Williams draws a double team 70% of the time, so there can be ample opportunities for Javon Kinlaw to get one-on-one matchups. If he can do it, perhaps he'll be in for a big contract. Now, Kinlaw is not a very established player. As we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets, we're going to talk about the last motivation that really is focused on this team, and that's players trying to establish themselves in the NFL. Kinlaw is one of them. Jets have plenty of young guys on this team looking to make their marks in the league. We'll talk about who they are continuing here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. We love them so much that we never want them to stop. But as the playoffs for the basketball and hockey wound down, now we get fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel helps us keep the sports going whenever we want. All we have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime we're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Of course, summer's still exciting without as many sports going on. We have the Yankees and Mets trying to make playoff pushes, and the Jets aren't that far away. Jets are just a couple of months away from kicking off their next season. They're an underdog in their first game against the San Francisco 49ers. Well, FanDuel is the place to get in on the action. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about what motivates players on the Jets. And we've talked about players trying to show they can still play coming back from injury. We've talked about players who are seeking a new contract. There's a third group of players I want to talk about right now. And these are guys looking to show that they belong in the NFL. In the last segment, I talked a little bit about Javon Kinlaw, who after 4 years with the San Francisco 49ers, it's not really clear what he's capable of doing. So he's a guy who would fit this list. But mainly we're talking about young players. We're talking about guys the Jets just drafted in the last year or two. I think one of the guys to keep an eye on is Will McDonald. I think we all remember how surprised everybody was at the point the Jets drafted McDonald. In fact, I think of all the Jets content creators out there, I may have been the only one that wasn't completely down on it. And that's because I think that, you have to look beyond what's an immediate need for your team. And I think at the end of the day, all that really matters when you think back on whether a draft pick is good or not is whether the guy produces. If Will McDonald goes out there and is an 8 to 10 sack a year guy, I think we're going to look back on that pick fondly. So he's a guy who's going to step into a bigger role this year. At the start of the offseason, I thought, maybe he was on the way out because the Jets kept adding all these defensive ends, and then the trading of John Franklin Myers kind of opened up a spot for him. It opened up an opportunity for McDonald to go out there and produce. And then, of course, we can talk about this year's draft class. Olu Fashanu, he's not going to get an immediate spot. He's not going to get an immediate opportunity to play. But I think we all know that with a couple of 33-year-old tackles, one of whom Tyron Smith, who has struggled quite a bit through much of his career to stay on the field and is now aging. And even Morgan Moses, a guy who's been very durable through much of his career, but last year missed time for the first time in quite a while. Fashanu is going to get an opportunity to step on the field, and he'll be able to show what he can do. Malachi Corley, his path to playing time is a little complex. Now he's going to see some opportunities. I think the Jets will definitely manufacture touches for him. I think he'll get opportunities on gadget plays. I think the Jets will run their share of jet sweeps and reverses and end arounds for him. I think they'll throw him plenty of screens. That's how we succeeded in college. I would imagine the Jets will try and figure out ways to get in the ball in space. I wouldn't be surprised. Everybody, I think anytime anybody breaks anything down, they always talk about the new kickoff rules. How will they impact things with Corley? I think the Jets will at least give him a shot. I think the Jets will maybe take a look at him in preseason and see how he takes to it under the new kickoff rules, because a guy who's very difficult to bring down, a guy who, he may be listed as a wide receiver, but in many ways his game resembles a running back. He kind of plays like a running back. How much of an opportunity, how much will he be able to produce right off the bat? A part of that depends on how quickly he takes to route running, but a real opportunity there. And we could go back to last year's class. Joe Tippmann, who I thought played very solid football last year. In fact, it's funny, during the season last year, I thought Tippmann was fine, but it wasn't until I went back and kind of reviewed the film after the season that I came away feeling really good about Tippmann, really good about where he's going as a player. So chance for him to take his game to the next level. And I think part of what's compelling about Tippmann for me is that this is a guy who was in the middle of a mess. I mean, look, when you're an offensive lineman and you're in a situation where the guys next to you are changing week to week, where quite frankly, a lot of the guys next to you aren't that talented. I mean, there were games where Tippmann was playing next to guys who really did not belong in the NFL. He was playing next to guys who were practice squatters. And when you're dealing with all this adversity, when you're dealing with all these things, and for you to hold your own most weeks, I mean, that's a really good thing. That's a very encouraging thing. The question is, how good can Tippmann be? How can he take his game to the next level? It's an opportunity. This year is an opportunity for him to really lock down that center position for a long time. I think last year we saw the makings of a guy who has the chance to be a really good center. This is the year where he can show you know what? You don't have to worry about center for another 10 years. I don't want to make comparisons to Kevin Mawai or Nick Mangold. Certainly not Mawai, because I don't think it's fair to ask Tippmann to be a Hall of Famer. But even Nick Mangold, who for a stretch was the best center in the NFL and through most of his career was one of the top centers in the league. I mean, I don't know if that's a fair thing to ask Tippmann to do, because Tippmann can be a very successful draft pick without being a Mawai or a Mangold. But the Jets were very lucky for a long stretch of time. Between 1998 and 2016, they had two centers who locked down that spot for all that time in Mawai and Mangold. And then they had a stretch where, things were a little shaky. And fortunately, after, in 2020, they signed Connor McGovern, who, brought some stability. Now Tippmann might be the long-term center. This year is an opportunity for him, and I'm sure he'll be plenty motivated this year to show that he can handle that role. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we'll have our weekly mailbag show.